Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. This is a really beautiful jazz ballad Christmas song, and it's very similar to a lot of jazz standard songs, especially because it shares the form, A-A-B-A, 32-bar form, that many jazz ballads and jazz standards share. For instance, Body and Soul, Over the Rainbow, You Don't Know What Love Is, to name just a few. There's tons, hundreds of songs with that form. So anyway, I didn't do anything too crazy with the actual form of the arrangement. I stayed pretty traditional, play the melody one time through, go into a solo over the A sections, come back to the melody at B. The only thing maybe a little bit different is I modulated up a minor third on the last A section. So I wanted to focus more, rather than get too creative with the form of the arrangement, focus on the little details to try to create a really kind of, I guess, romantic, kind of cozy, Christmassy vibe. So I was focused more on the details of creating that mood. And so I got more into voicing and harmony, reharmonizations, things like that with this arrangement. So anyway, I'd like to start off with talking about the playing and give you some tips, some things that I think about that might help you, not just with this song. A lot of these concepts that I'm going to explain you can use with any, especially ballad. There's a lot of the things that we can use that I'm going to show you that you can apply to any other song. So anyway, any of these lessons that I want to give, you can pretty much use all the information in other songs, so it's not just for this song. But so for instance, I want to talk first about the balance. And when we talk about the balance, it's actually pretty much the same for most music, whether it be jazz, classical, or whatever, pop. You have melody on top, then you have your bass on the bottom, and you have the harmony in between. And you want to think of those as almost like three different instruments going on at the same time, especially with how you play them dynamically. So obviously, you've probably heard it before. The melody should be on the top. The bass would come next, and then the softest part usually is going to be the harmony, the chords in between. All right, so that creating that balance is key to making a song like this sing. If the harmony, or if the harmony's too loud, you bring it out too much, you're going to lose the melody. You won't hear the melody clear enough. It won't sing the way you want it to. So that's the trick with this song. And maybe not as technical as some of my other arrangements, but it's more about trying to create a nice, beautiful sound on the piano. And that balance is the most important thing. So one thing that I think about, and actually I was taught this by some of my classical piano teachers when I studied, and about the distribution of weight in your hand. For instance, when you're playing, we'll talk about the first part of the song, letter A. Well, the first two notes, you have single note melody, so that's very easy to bring out the melody in that part. But on the third beat, where it gets to this chord, if you just play with the straight hand, you don't quite hear the melody enough. It's kind of lost there in the harmony, right? So what you want to do is kind of distribute the weight of your hands more towards the right side. So you really want to kind of, and put a little bit extra pressure there on your pinky, because your pinky is playing the melody on the top of those chords. And if you do that, you do it right, you can bring out that melody and it almost sounds like another instrument on top. So that's the sound that I want to go for here. Here's a good example of what I'm talking about. All right, so there, I think you can hear the difference that the melody is actually higher, it's louder than the harmony, okay? That's a key part of playing a ballad. And trying to work on that is really important. And I will give you a little tip here. This is something that I learned from one of my classical teachers, is that even though you're playing the notes, let's say for instance that third chord, C, D, E, G, even though you're playing these notes at the same time, when you distribute your hand, you're actually in slow motion, should almost make it like a arpeggio going down. That would be like, if you do that, it makes it a lot easier to bring out the note. Now, you do it so quickly that you can't tell that you're actually doing it. But that's a lot of the times, that's what I'm actually doing, is that I'm sort of hitting the note first on top and then slowly getting the note after that. So if you do that, you do it fast enough, then you can disguise the fact that you are actually arpeggiating the chord, and it'll sound like this. So if you were to look at that, like let's say with the MIDI, and actually slow it down really fast, you'll see that you're actually hitting that first note first. So try that, experiment with it. It's not something that you're probably going to master in 10 minutes. It's something that you're going to have to work on for a long time. It's something I've been working on for a long time to develop that kind of sound. So anyway, let's move on to the next part. So another important part about this song, right, is obviously it's a very beautiful melody with beautiful words. You want the melody to sing the whole time, and you want to have each phrase have its own shape, its own character to it. All right. Now I didn't put a lot of dynamics in there, like for instance crescendos and diminuendos. It can be played different ways, and you have to really discover each phrase for yourself, how to shape it. If you play the phrase straight with no dynamics and no character to it, it's going to sound really dry and really boring, okay? So I'll give you an example. I'll play the first 4 bars with no dynamics and really almost no expression to it. And it's going to sound, all right, well, you see what you think. It's actually kind of hard for me to play like that because you should never play like that. No expression, no ups and downs, little things that happen in the music. Those are the key parts that really bring out the emotion to the song. So now listen to it again. Now this time I'm going to add just a touch of expression to it, as if I'm singing the song. I'm a terrible singer, but I often sing so that I can hear the shape of the phrases when I play. So here's with expression this time. So that wasn't perfect there, but you got the idea that there's a little shape happening. Now it's the beginning of the song, and you don't want to overdo it either. You don't want to go too expressive and like you're playing some kind of Chopin piece and get really expressive. It's too much, right? You got to have a balance there. I think for this piece, especially in the beginning, a little bit of shape goes a long way with this one. For instance, if you were to overdo it, it's going to sound maybe something like this. I think if I heard somebody play like that, I'd be really annoyed. I would annoy myself. So again, you want to go somewhere in between there. You don't want to have too much, you don't want to have too little. But where that balance lies, it really depends on each person. That's why I don't like to write overly specific dynamics, because you're not me. I feel it a certain way, and although the notes I did write out, how you feel each phrase depends on the person. So you really have to discover that for yourself. That's really something, that's what brings the personality to each performance, is those little details. And that's why I don't usually write extremely specific. I try to focus on the overall big picture, things that I think are really important to the performance, but leave room for interpretation for each individual performer. And feel free to take liberties with that. Find what works for you, what makes sense for you. All right? So let's move on. The whole A, section up until the solo, basically you're playing with a harmonic pedal. You're changing the pedal every time that the chord changes to create this smooth effect. That's typical for any ballad, whether it be jazz or classical or pop, whatever it might be. You typically pedal harmonically. We do that often. Now, if I pedal like that the whole time, even on the solo, the color of the piano, the sound, it tends to get a little bit monotonous, a little bit boring. So with the solo, I pretty much don't use any pedal and turn it into more of a sort of this double time feel, swing feel. Now, what you can do with that is like a complete change of color, almost like a different instrument it becomes. So I'm going to move ahead to that section, which is letter E, where it starts on the solo. All right, now when I'm playing the pedal, you can't really hear staccatos and clear articulations in the melodic lines that I do with the solo. So it doesn't work as well. Of course, you can still play with pedal on a solo section in certain times, but for this one, I think it's better no pedal, almost no pedal. All right, so let's take a look here at E. The left hand is basically playing this stride, and that's going to be basically just a staccato left hand, pretty simple and basic. Got this kind of vibe, occasional little runs up to the bass lines and stuff. All right, so most of the character for this, the left hand is just kind of keeping the groove and playing the chords. The character comes in the right hand. The right hand is singing a melodic phrase. And those little accents, the little staccatos. And then we also have some mezzo staccatos like over here. Now, those articulations are really what bring out the character. Of course, the notes are important too, but just as important as those notes is the expression, the expressiveness of those notes. How we shape each phrase, just like we did with the melody, we need to shape each phrase of the solo as well. Now that's going to be mini crescendos, little diminuendos, bringing out accents on the notes. The overall feel, and this I would say this applies for most jazz ballads or kind of light swinging songs like this, is you want to play with sort of a light, bouncy touch, okay? Now just in general, like, I'm just kind of playing around right now, but basically you get the idea that you want to have this light touch. Now if I'm playing everything really heavy, which a lot of people make that mistake, they think, okay, jazz, oh, it's got to be loud, it's got to be exciting all the time. Well, there's times where that would happen, where you would play loud, but most of the time actually it's light, it's kind of bouncing along, it's not heavy. All right, so if I play everything heavy, actually really tiring to listen to that. If I heard somebody play like that, I would leave. I could not take it because it's just like in your face. Everything's in your face. And there's no contrast between the accented notes and the non-accented notes. So the idea is that with the lines, your overall playing is actually really soft, like a mezzo piano maybe, a piano. And when you have the accented notes, those jump up all of a sudden to, like, let's say like a forte. So you're going from piano to forte, and those notes that you accent are really going to jump out that way. But you can only do that if your overall volume is soft. If the overall volume is high, there's no room. You've already reached the top of the dynamic ceiling. There's no room to go with the accents. So everything's going to be accented, and it's just going to sound really crazy. It's just not going to sound good, all right? And you can come up with some better description than that. I'm not the best with the description on that one. But so, for instance, let me play a letter E a little bit and show you kind of the touch that I'm talking about, all right? All right, so you notice that overall touch is actually really quiet. It's a light phrase, but you hear those accents in those boo ba da boo doo ba boo doo ba ba. Okay? That is what makes it swing. That's what really bounces it along, gives it that feel. All right, so a lot of people ask me all the time, a lot of my students, a lot of people on YouTube, where do I put the accents on the notes? Okay, well there is no rule to where to put the accents. All right, there are some general, maybe some general guidelines as to where you can put them, but for instance, if you're playing a long phrase, often the highest note of the phrase would naturally want to be accented. If you're playing boo-ba-dum-doo-ba-doo-doo-bop, or boo-bop-ba-doo-doo-ba-doo-bop. All right, so, or often the last note of the phrase. All right, but that is not a rule that you could apply every time. And the whole idea with accents is that you don't want to apply the same pattern every time. If you do that, it's going to be really boring. The cool part about jazz and with the accenting of these phrases is that it's really random and that it happens in different places. It could happen on the offbeat, it could happen on the downbeat, it could happen in different places. And that's really the key to making it work, is almost the randomness of the accents. And I put in some accents in this music just in places that I thought it really, really needed an accent. I put more accents in there than is written in there. And the reason I didn't put all the accents into the music is because I want the player to have the freedom to accent where they feel the phrase needs that accent. So you have to kind of spend time with each phrase and figure out, experiment, and see what makes sense musically. And I think it really helps to sing the phrases. These are hard phrases to sing because they're really fast, some of them. But you could try, for instance, let's say at measure 41. We got bop, bop. Now, singing the pitch of these is impossible, and that's okay. You can just get the idea of the shape of the phrase, right? There's no way I could sing this. You'd have to be an acrobatic singer. But for instance, at 41, I might sing this phrase to get the idea of what seems natural with the dynamics and the accents and what's going to sound good. So here it goes. Forgive my singing, it's terrible. Bop, bop. All right? Absolutely terrible. But you can get the idea that when I get to the top of that that feels like ba as opposed to that this part here is going to sound more natural to do that. Now, and then as I'm coming down that scale, it's kind of slowly getting softer and softer, diminuting. Okay? So as a general rule too, this applies for classical music, you can sort of, as you're moving up, as the melodic line is moving up, it tends to naturally want to get louder, and as the melodic line moves down, it tends to naturally want to get softer. If you sing a phrase, that's typically how you would sing it naturally. All right, so that's a kind of a general rule that you can use to maybe to help you get started. Doesn't always have to be like that, but as a general concept, that's kind of what makes sense naturally. So anyway, let's move on to the next part. And talking about the double time feel of this. All right, so when we get to the solo section at E, it's almost as if we're playing twice as fast. That's what the double time feel means. We're actually not. We're reading it at the same speed, but we're feeling it at double speed. So that means that, say, the drummer in the first part's playing like jazz ballad with brushes. They're going okay? It's like 1, 2, 3. It's moving along very slowly. But then when we get to the E section, it's like all of a sudden now he's playing with the ride cymbal, and it's more like so. That is actually the feeling that you want to have, is this boom. And so the underlying triplet or anyway, you're feeling this triplet And we're going to end up swinging the 16th notes as opposed to the 8th notes. The 16th notes will get swung. So anyway, let's move on to the next part. This next part of the video is really geared towards people who are interested in improvising or arranging, and especially in a jazz style. Although I recommend that if you're interested in just playing in a jazz style, to understand this part too, because it will help you understand what the arranger, or in some cases what the composer was thinking and what is going on with the music, which will help you express the music, to understand what was behind the intention of the composer or the arranger is really important. So anyway, let's start with the harmony. And what I put up here is the first four measures that you see here, the C major, A minor 7, is the original song, the original harmony, and then the next four bars is the harmony that I put on. So you can see what I did from the original to the thing. So first off, I played the original one. Alright, that's pretty boring. And if I played like that, you probably wouldn't be following my channel. So anyway, I'm just playing with root position voicings, very basic sound. And this song, if you look at the harmony of the whole thing, it's a lot of 1 6 2 5 1 6 2 5 1 6 2 5 1 6 2 5. It's like over and over and over all the A sections. The B section changes, but so if you don't come up with some kind of variation over that 1 6 2 5, it's gonna get boring. All right, so you got to come up with something. Now I start off the first part of the song without going too far. It's not exactly complete reharmonization of it or anything, but it's enough, giving it a little bit of spice to create a new color to it, to give it extra, intensity, a little more tension to it, so that it's a little more interesting. And this is what I came up with. So. I didn't throw in the whole kitchen sink off the first part, but just enough little tension there to kind of grab you, get you in, you create this mood of that I was going for as after for this piece. So now if you look a little bit more directly at what I'm doing, the first chord C, the original goes C to A. Now, if I want to get to C to A, I can just go C to A, but I could also lead it there with a C, B flat, A, and if I play the melody with the bass movement, I could have also done it where instead of ending with having B flat 7 be on beat 3, I could have had it go to beat 2, which would sound... Now that would sound something like this. Which is also nice. That could have worked as well. Instead, I delayed the A7 by a beat by going to beat 3. Now, what I think makes this work come together is the voicings. All right, the voicings are key to really anything. If you're going to play jazz harmony or any kind of harmony, is how you voice those notes, where you put those notes, not just the chord, but how do you play that chord. All right, so let's take a look here. The first voicing, C6, that's a pretty basic one, okay? So a pretty basic chord, but it's the first chord. The melody's the root. There's not a whole lot that you can do with it without making it stand out a lot. So it's a pretty basic chord. Just the sixth gives it enough tension that it's not a triad. Okay? So sometimes that is all you need, just one little note, which just gives me the sixth. All right, now we get to beat 3 when I decided to use the B flat as the root here. That's the root movement. So now when we're coming up, we're deciding what chord I want to use here. What you want to do is take a look at the root. It's easier if you put this in like a 1 octave range. So here's our root, B flat. Here is our melody note. Everything else is going to fall in between. But if we look at the relationship between these two notes, what is the interval? The interval is a major sixth. Now, if I have a major sixth, I can use a major chord, I can use a minor chord, minor sixth, I can use a diminished chord. I can also use a dominant chord, a B flat 7. Any of those chords would fit with the interval of a major sixth. I decide, I'll just give you the example. So if I went with a minor 6, it would sound like this. Not bad, that kind of works. I could go with a major 6 or a major 7 in this case. Major 7. Alright, okay, well, that can work too. That sounds nice. I could have also done diminished. Not my favorite. Maybe you like it, but I don't think that one. I found that the B flat 7 in this case worked the best. It was the sound that I was after. After, I experimented with the different sounds, different chords, and this is what I thought fit the best. So. Alright, so I decided that I wanted to go with this B flat 7. Okay, that's step 1, deciding what chord that you want to use in this situation. Okay, now the next step is where we get into the voicing of the chord. And the voicing all it means is, where do we put the notes? Where do the notes go? All right, so that's extremely important to making a good sound, and making the harmony work. I would say more important than reharmonization is having the skills to create good voicings. If without the good voicings, even the coolest reharms aren't going to sound good. But you can make, with the right voicings, you can make simple chord progressions sound nice. Okay, so that's an extremely important skill. It maybe doesn't get quite as much recognition as reharmonizations. Reharmonizations are cool, they have that image, but really, without voicing, the reharms really don't mean anything. So, let's talk about how I came up with this voicing, and you can use this concept to create your own voicings. It's a process, all right? So we start with the melody note. It's a G. We start with the bass, then we add the bass tone, B flat. Now, where we put that bass tone is really important to the sound of the voicing. All right, I could put the bass tone here. Now that's going to create a very small range because all the other notes are going to fit between the melody and the bass. So that gives me just a major 6. It doesn't give us any room to work with. So that's probably too close. I could go lower, way down here. Now that gives us almost a 3-octave range to work with, plus it's really low. Maybe if we were going for a really dynamic sound, that might work. But at this point in the song, we're not ready for anything too dramatic or dynamic. So I think that about the 2-octave range is in between 1.5 and 2 octaves here is a perfect distance between the melody and the bass tone. So we decide, okay, that makes the most sense in this case. Next thing we want to add is the 3rd and the 7th. Okay? Now we have 2 choices here. There's only 1 7th in between these 2 notes, so we have no choice but to put the 7th here. All right. Now the 3rd though could go here, or the 3rd could go here. Either of those would work in this case. Sometimes things you want to be careful about is if I was a little bit lower, let's say like on an F, and I put the 3rd here, it's too low. It creates a muddy sound that we probably don't like. So I think here it's kind of borderline. It's okay. You can get away with the 3rd down here. I decided to put it up here though. Either one would have worked. So now we've come to this point. We got melody, we got bass, we got 3rd and 7th. All right, now the final step to the voicing is adding this spice to it. What do we want to do? How much tension do we want to create with this voicing? We don't have to put any more tension. We could just go with this. Or we could add lots of tension. So we already have the melody in the chord as the 6th, or in this case the 13th. We could add the 9th. We could also add the sharp 11th. We could go with all kinds of different options because it's a dominant chord. A flat 9 would work. A sharp 9 would work. We could do I don't know, in this case maybe that's about it. It's kind of all these different possible sounds could work. But I chose to go with the 9 and the sharp 11. So we have this kind of sound. And then A7 sharp 9. anyway, we end up with this voicing. I could have put the third lower, and it would have sounded like this. Not bad, but I like this clustery sound where we have three notes all clustered together. We call those clusters. And I like that sound for this case. All right, so that's how I came up with that voicing. It's a long process. And in the beginning, you probably have to take your time and experiment with a lot of different things. But as you do it a lot and you stick to that process, go in the same order: melody, root, third, seventh, then add the tension. Go in that process each time. You can start to develop your own what you like, your own taste in your voicing, and you'll get faster at it. I've been doing it a long time, so now I can pretty much find the voicings I like fairly quickly. I'm usually just right there on the spot. So anyway, but I went through a lot of practice using that process, so I highly recommend it. And we're going to skip ahead here to the second A section, and this is where I actually get into a little bit of reharm, like real reharm here. So the tip of the regular song goes 1 6 2 5 1 6 2 5 1 6 2 5, right? It's changing the chord every 2 beats. So what I did here, you can see here measure 23, is I changed the chords every beat for this one measure. And the goal is that we're gonna get back to the C major in the next 2 bars. So it's not that I'm going in ending in a new place, it's just that I'm getting there in a different way. So you can usually think of reharms as like that. Your ending place might not change where you're gonna end up, but how you get there can change. And there's a lot of different paths that you can take to get from point A to point B, but you're always moving in a direction. All right, so here's what I did. First, to just play the root movement so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, then we add the voicings to that, and I ended up doing it. Okay, so we've turned our basic 1 6 2 5 now into an interesting 1 7 3 6 flat 6. 5 sus, 5 altered, and then we go back to 1. Talk about that A flat major 7 chord. On the A flat major 7 chord, it's substituting for a D minor 7, and maybe you're familiar with this. It's called a tritone. The tritone splits an octave in half. It could be an augmented 4th or diminished 5th. Split an octave in half. And often the tritones are dominant chords, but they don't have to be dominant chords. In this case, it's a major 7 chord, and we end up with this sound. And it leads us right back to the 5. So, anyway, the next section I'd like to talk about is inner voices. So, inner voices are sort of like counter lines, counter melodies that are moving against the melody. And they can be really cool. So the first part of the song, I'm basically just playing voicings, maybe a little bit of arpeggios with the left hand. But once I get to letter C, then I start to add some inner voices, basically some counter melodies to the main melody. If you think of Bach, or you think of any great composer, they're always having these counter melodies moving to the main melody. Well, the same goes with jazz. It sounds cool to hear sort of these counterpoint melodies moving on. I'll play this section for you real quick. So, the concept here is that you're just adding another melody that fits with it. Basically, like you would think of like a Bach fugue or something. All right, so there you can see that it's like a sequence going on. And then slight different variation, but basically a sequential pattern moving there. That's something easy for the ear to latch onto, is those kind of sequential patterns that are moving. So that's something you can experiment with there. And also, So if you also notice here the B7 flat 9, I start with this voicing, and then the inner voicing is moving down a half step to these little half step movements that kind of come in between. Those are nice little things that you can do with, especially with dominant chords, but you can use them on any chords, major chords, and this and that. So inner voicing's really nice thing to do with jazz harmony. So the next concept I'd like to talk about, we get to the solo, is I use this scale a lot in this song, is the G altered scale or the G altered dominant scale, which is, if you break it down, it's an A flat melodic minor scale that starts from the 7th degree, which is G. And if you analyze it from a G7 perspective, you have the root, the 3rd, and the 7th, and the key part of the chord, and then you add the flat 9, the sharp 9, the flat 5, and the sharp 5. You get all these tones together, and you have what's called an altered scale. Now, again, we're playing this song, the chords, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1, 6, 2, 5. The typical chord for a 5 chord is to use a dominant 7 chord. A dominant 7 chord, obviously, is a Mixolydian scale. Mixolydian scale is cool, and it can be used nicely, but if you use it every time, the same scale every time, it's going to get really boring. So you have at some point to switch it up and throw in an altered scale. It switches up the color of the sound. So for instance, measure 41. So there that is an altered scale, literal altered scale. And then with any scale in jazz is that you don't always want to play the notes exactly as is. You want to add, sometimes you add some chromatics to it, sometimes you add some notes that aren't in the scale. So even though I'm playing on an altered scale, I will use other notes outside of the scale. You can use that with any scale, whether it be Ionian on C major 7, using this, for instance, the flat 3rd, the sharp 5, or the flat 9, any tone you can make work. And that's really the key to making it sound jazzy, is to figure out how to use those notes that aren't in the scale and make them sound melodic and make it work. The key to making a good phrase and a good line is having a target point, and a point that you're going to end the phrase on. So that's the key to it. And how you get there, like we talked about with harmony, it's the same thing. You have a starting point, you have an ending point. Now how you get from starting point to ending point, you can go in many, many different directions. It's the same with melodic lines like this. We can go in a lot of different directions. We can throw in a whole bunch of different notes, use all kinds of chromatics and crazy stuff, but we resolve on a note that sounds good. All that stuff is going to make sense. Now flip it around. We could do all this crazy, amazing stuff and then end on a note that doesn't sound good, and it's just the whole phrase doesn't work now. It didn't work. So it's just like if instead of ending on the 5, let's say I ended on the 6, the flat 6 or something. Let's see how that sounds. You get an idea. See what I'm talking about. Oh, now that whole phrase doesn't make sense now. It didn't resolve properly. All right, so that shows the importance of ending, and that's where you want to think about your phrases. You don't have time to think about every single note that you're playing. You're kind of letting your ear guide you, but you are sort of thinking about where you're going to end that phrase, where it's going to resolve. So you have these target point in mind. Okay, you don't have time to think about every note if you're improvising, but you do have time to sort of roughly think about where you're going to end the phrase. So, and then the last concept I'd like to talk about is the ending chord. So the end, we finish in E flat major. Typically you would end on the 1 chord. Okay, that's, ending on the 1 chord, that's the normal way to end it. Well, you could go up a half step and end on an E, which would create a major 7th relationship, and turn that into a major 7, and delay the final resolution, and then finally finish off with a flat. So that sounds like this. that makes the ending a little more special, a little more fun. This is definitely not something that I created. This is something that pretty much every jazz piano player uses, and it's how you use it though that can make it interesting. A lot of the stuff that I do, or most jazz piano players do, other jazz piano players do similar things, but we do it in slightly different ways. That's what makes everybody's playing unique. There's so many different variables to it, but we can definitely learn from it. So you can do that with any major song that ends on the 1. You can go up a half step and finish a major 7 chord, up a half step, or you could also go down a whole step, in this case D flat major 7, and then go to resolve it to the 1. That's another option. And the scale that I'm using there, instead of using a major scale, I raise the 4th to sharp 4, and now that's called the Lydian scale, and we're going to use that sound is much more open sounding and yeah, it sounds kind of spacey. And then again on the last chord, using the Lydian scale. So anyway, I could spend hours and hours and hours, if not days, talking about details on this song, but I don't want to bore you to death. I probably already have. But anyway, maybe you found this interesting, maybe not. I hope so. I'd like to come up with more. I like teaching, I like talking about the songs, and I like sharing ideas. So if you ever have any questions, please drop them on my comments. I'll be happy to answer them. And definitely follow my channel, and stay tuned for more videos like this. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.